It only takes one lie to burn down years of trust. People think betrayal comes from strangers, but when it comes from your own family, the wound never really heals. I remember the day it started so clearly. Margaret, my daughter, had been acting distant for weeks. She avoided eye contact, whispered on the phone, and every time I asked if something was wrong, she snapped back, "Stop worrying, Mom. You don't need to know everything." I was old, yes, but I wasn't blind. Mothers can feel when something is wrong, and my heart told me something heavy was building behind her silence. One evening, I went to the grocery store, and a neighbor, Mrs. Collins, stopped me in the aisle. Her face was tight, almost awkward, as if she didn't know how to say it. Finally, she leaned closer and whispered, "Margaret told people you're unstable, that you've been forgetting things and making up stories." I froze. My hands trembled as I clutched the handle of the cart. I knew I was getting older, but unstable? A liar? I had spent my entire life working, raising her alone after her father left, and now my own daughter was poisoning my reputation? I forced a smile to Mrs. Collins and said, "I see. Thank you for telling me." But inside my chest, something cracked. That night at dinner, I couldn't hold back. "Margaret," I asked, keeping my voice steady, "why are people saying I'm unstable? Why would you say such a thing?" She didn't even flinch. She kept eating, eyes glued to her plate, then said, "Maybe if you didn't act so forgetful all the time, people wouldn't think that way." Her words cut deeper than a knife. Forgetful? Yes, sometimes I misplaced my glasses or forgot where I left the keys, but I was not insane. And to hear my own daughter twist small mistakes into a story of madness, it made me realize this wasn't a careless comment. She wanted people to believe it. But why? That question kept me awake night after night. I replayed her tone, her coldness, the way she avoided me. And slowly, I began to notice things around the house. Letters missing from the mail, bills paid late when I was sure I had handled them, conversations I never had, but she swore I did. It felt like she was building a case against me. One afternoon, I overheard her speaking on the phone. Her voice was low, urgent. "Don't worry, she won't fight it. Everyone already knows she's losing it. By the time it's done, nobody will believe her." I pressed my back against the wall, my heart pounding. My hands shook, but not from age. This was fear. My own daughter was planning something against me, and I didn't know what yet. But I promised myself, right there in that hallway, that I would find out. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. I sat by the window with my tea, staring at the street outside, while my mind replayed Margaret's words from that phone call. By the time it's done, nobody will believe her. Done with what? What exactly was she planning? I tried to calm myself by reminding my heart that maybe I had misheard. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. A mother knows her child's voice, the tone she uses when she's lying, the rhythm she slips into when she's hiding something. Margaret wasn't the same daughter I had raised with trembling hands and endless sacrifices. No, this woman who shared my roof was colder, sharper, and she had secrets she didn't want to uncover. Later that day, while folding laundry in her room, I noticed her desk drawer slightly open. Papers were sticking out. I knew it was wrong to snoop, but I couldn't stop myself. My heart thumped as I slid the drawer open further. Inside, I found a stack of legal documents, letters from banks, and something that made my throat go dry, a petition for guardianship. My own daughter was trying to prove I was incapable of handling my life, so she could legally take over my finances, my house, everything. My hands shook as I held the papers. How could she? I whispered to myself. Why would she do this to me? Just then, I heard footsteps in the hall. I stuffed the papers back and quickly went back to folding clothes as if nothing had happened. Margaret appeared at the door. Her eyes scanned me suspiciously. "What are you doing in my room?" she asked flatly. "Just laundry," I replied, forcing a smile. She didn't smile back. She didn't even blink. She just stood there for a moment, then muttered, "You shouldn't be touching my things." Her words sent a chill through me, not because of what she said, but how she said it, like I was the intruder in her space, in my own home. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, thinking about every time she had whispered on the phone, every look she had given me lately. The picture was becoming clearer, but more painful with every piece. She wasn't just telling people I was unstable. She was building a whole story, a trap that would end with me losing everything I had worked for. A week later, the whispers in town grew louder. At the pharmacy, the clerk gave me a pitiful smile and asked, "Are you feeling better, Mrs. Harris? I heard you've been having some confusion lately." My chest tightened. "Who told you that?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The clerk looked uncomfortable. "Well, your daughter mentioned it. She was just worried, you know?" Worried. That word burned me. Margaret wasn't worried. She was planting seeds, slowly poisoning my reputation until everyone doubted my sanity. I walked home that afternoon, my grocery bag heavy in one hand, my thoughts heavier still. That was when I noticed the front door of the house slightly open. My heart jumped. I stepped inside, calling out her name, "Margaret." No answer. The house was silent. I checked the living room, the kitchen, then climbed the stairs. Her bedroom door was open, and inside I saw her, sitting on the floor with piles of old photo albums and papers spread around her. She looked startled when I appeared in the doorway. "What are you doing?" I asked carefully. She frowned, almost annoyed. "Just sorting through old things." "Don't worry about it." But I did worry, because those weren't just old things. They were my things: birth certificates, property documents, and even the deed to the house. I recognized a faded envelope instantly. I stepped closer, but she quickly shoved the papers back into a box. "Mom, you need to rest," she said firmly. "You're not keeping up like you used to. Let me handle all this." Her tone was final, commanding, as if I had no right to question her. I wanted to scream at her, but I bit my tongue. I couldn't reveal that I already knew about the guardianship petition. Instead, I nodded quietly and walked away, but inside my blood boiled. The following days were a blur of small humiliations. She corrected me in front of neighbors, saying things like, "Oh, Mom forgets a lot lately. Don't mind her." She interrupted me during conversations, laughed at my stories as if they were nonsense, and even took over handling my bills without asking. One evening, while washing dishes, I overheard her talking to someone at the door. It was a man's voice, calm and professional. He said, "If she signs these, we can move forward quickly." Margaret replied, "Don't worry, she'll sign. She trusts me." I froze. My hands submerged in soapy water, my breath caught in my chest. Sign what? What was she pushing me into? I dried my hands and crept toward the hallway. But by the time I peeked around the corner, the man was gone. Margaret was standing there with a folder in her hand, her face flushed, her eyes narrowing when she saw me. "Who was that?" I asked. "No one important," she snapped. "Just business." But business with my life, I thought silently. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled out an old notebook and started writing everything down. Every strange comment, every missing bill, every cruel whisper from town. If she was going to paint me as unstable, then I would have proof of her lies. It was the only power I had left. A few days later, another twist came, one I hadn't expected. I received a letter in the mail, addressed to me but already opened. Inside was a notice from the bank, stating that someone had tried to access my accounts with a power of attorney document. My heart raced as I read it again and again. Power of attorney? Margaret had tried to take legal control of my money. When I confronted her, holding the letter in my trembling hands, she didn't even look guilty. She just sighed and said, "Mom, you don't understand. I'm only trying to protect you. You're not capable of handling these things anymore. One mistake, and you could lose everything. I'm the only one keeping this house together." My voice shook with rage. "You're the one trying to take it all from me." For a split second, her mask slipped. She glared at me, her eyes hard and cold, before she turned away. "Believe whatever you want," she muttered. That glare haunted me. It wasn't the face of a caring daughter. It was the face of someone who saw me as an obstacle. That night, As I lay awake, I realized something I hadn't dared admit before. My daughter didn't just want control. She wanted me erased piece by piece until I no longer stood in her way. And if I didn't fight back soon, she might succeed. The days after that confrontation felt heavier than any storm I had ever lived through. I moved through my own house like a guest, afraid of the silence, suspicious of every word my daughter spoke. Margaret didn't apologize, not even once. Instead, she behaved as if nothing had happened, humming while she cooked, talking about the weather, and asking me if I remembered to take my medicine. But there was a tone behind her questions, a sharpness hidden under the softness. Like every word was meant to remind me of the forgetfulness she wanted everyone else to believe. I began to notice little changes that sent my mind spinning. She rearranged the kitchen cabinets and then acted surprised when I couldn't find sugar. She hid the remote, then found it in the freezer, laughing loudly, saying, "Mom, you really are slipping these days." At first, I doubted myself. Maybe I had misplaced it. Maybe I was tired. But after it happened again and again, I realized she was staging these things on purpose. It wasn't enough for her to spread lies outside. She wanted me to question myself inside my own home. One evening, I was sitting in the living room when she brought me a cup of tea. She set it down with an exaggerated smile. "Here you go, Mom. Chamomile, good for your nerves." I lifted the cup to my lips, but before I sipped, something in her expression made me pause. She was watching me too closely. My stomach twisted. I set the cup down slowly. "Not thirsty right now," I said. Her smile faded for just a second before she quickly covered it up. "Suit yourself," she muttered and left the room. My hands trembled as I stared at the untouched tea. Was I being paranoid? Or was she trying to prove I couldn't even take care of myself? The next morning, I made a decision. If I wanted to survive whatever game she was playing, I had to be smarter. I started hiding my own set of notes under the loose board in my bedroom floor. Every suspicious act, every cruel word, every missing item, I recorded all, dated and described. I wanted to make sure there was a trail that nobody could deny. But I wasn't prepared for what happened a week later. I received a letter from a county court. It stated that a hearing had been scheduled regarding my capacity to manage my affairs. The petition had already been filed. My knees nearly buckled as I read it. She had done it. She had gone through with the guardianship plan, dragging me into court to prove I was unfit. When I confronted her, the mask came off entirely. "Why are you doing this to me?" I asked, holding up the letter with shaking hands. She didn't flinch. She looked me right in the eye and said, "Because you're weak, because you'll only get worse, and because everything you have is wasted in your hands. I deserve this house. I deserve your savings. I took care of you, didn't I? Don't act like I owe you anything." Her words stabbed me deeper than I could bear. This wasn't just greed, it was contempt. My own daughter resented me, saw me as nothing but a burden in her way. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the dim light bulb above. My tears fell into my hands. But beneath the sorrow, a new feeling began to rise. Anger. I had sacrificed too much for her, working double shifts, skipping meals so she could eat, mending her clothes when I had none for myself. I had carried her through every failure, every heartbreak, and this was how she repaid me. She thought I was powerless. She thought age had made me weak. She was wrong. The next few days, I watched her more carefully than ever before. She thought I was still the same gullible mother, the one who trusted her blindly. But now, I observed her every move like a detective. I noticed she had been meeting with a man I didn't recognize. He came to the house twice, each time in a pressed suit, carrying a black briefcase. They would sit in the dining room with the door closed, their voices muffled but urgent. When I passed by, their voices would drop to whispers. One afternoon, I waited until she left the store and went into her room again. I knew I was risking everything, but I couldn't stop myself. In the back of her closet, hidden in a box beneath old sweaters, I found papers that nearly made my knees give out. Forged documents, my signature copied onto them. One was a fake will, leaving everything to her. Another was a letter, supposedly from me, stating I wanted her to have full control of my finances. I sat on the floor, my breath shallow, staring at the proof of her betrayal. She wasn't just lying, she was erasing me. Just then, I heard the front door slam. My heart jumped into my throat. She was home. Panicked, I shoved the papers back into the box and pushed it deep into the closet, then rushed back to my room, trying to calm my breathing. That night, she was unusually cheerful at dinner. "Court is coming up soon," she said with a smirk. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll take care of everything. You won't have to stress anymore." I forced myself to smile back, even though my insides were boiling. Let her think she was winning. Let her believe I was broken. If she thought I was weak, she would lower her guard. And when the time came, she wouldn't see me coming. But then came another twist I hadn't expected. 2 days later, Mrs. Collins, the neighbor, knocked on my door. Her face was pale, her voice shaking. "I didn't want to get involved," she whispered. "But Margaret came to see me. She asked me to write a statement for the court, saying I saw you wandering outside at night, confused. She wanted me to lie for her." I felt my chest tighten. "And did you?" I asked. Mrs. Collins shook her head firmly. "No, I told her I wouldn't lie, but she's been asking around. She's trying to gather people to speak against you." My knees weakened, and I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. It wasn't enough for Margaret to spread rumors. She was recruiting others to build her case. "Please," I whispered to Mrs. Collins, my voice trembling. "If it comes to court, will you tell the truth?" "I will," she promised, but her eyes carried doubt. I knew how rumors spread in this town. People loved a story, and Margaret had already given them one. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked to the house in silence, touching the walls, the photographs, the little souvenirs from years gone by. This was my life, my home, and she was trying to take it all. I felt a burning in my chest, not fear this time, but a determination I hadn't felt in years. She wanted war? She would get it. The next morning, I made my first quiet move. While Margaret was out, I called an old friend, Mr. Thompson, a retired lawyer I hadn't spoken to in years. My hands shook as I explained everything, from the forged documents to the court petition. He listened quietly, then said in a calm, steady voice, "Keep every piece of evidence you can find. Don't let her know you're aware. When the time comes, we'll strike." For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. I wasn't alone anymore. But little did I know, Margaret had another card hidden up her sleeve. One that would cut even deeper. One that would test how far I was willing to go to protect myself. The house had become a battlefield of silence. Margaret moved around like a queen in her own palace, her footsteps heavy and decisive, while I drifted through the rooms like a shadow, careful not to reveal how much I knew. Every smile she gave me felt rehearsed. Every gentle gesture carried poison. She believed she had already won, and in her arrogance, she underestimated me. I followed Mr. Thompson's advice and began gathering evidence quietly. It wasn't easy. My hands shook as I tried to use the old camera I had tucked away in a drawer. Sometimes I thought my age betrayed me. I couldn't move as fast, couldn't sneak as easily, but desperation made me sharper. One evening, when she left her papers scattered across the dining table, I snapped photographs of the forged documents using the camera and hid the memory card inside the lining of my old winter coat. But the game grew more dangerous than I expected. Margaret was clever, too clever. She started testing me in front of others, creating small public spectacles to chip away at my credibility. At the grocery store, she held up a box of cereal and asked loudly, "Mom, remember this one? You ate it every day when I was a kid." When I shook my head, she laughed in front of everyone, saying, "See? She forgets so much these days." The cashier smiled politely, but I saw the doubt in her eyes. Margaret was building her case brick by brick, moment by moment, turning my everyday slips into evidence of weakness. A week later, the first real blow came. A social worker visited the house. A stranger with sharp glasses and a clipboard, asking questions in a gentle but clinical tone. "Do you ever forget where you are? Do you feel safe at home? Do you often lose track of time?" I wanted to scream that none of this was natural, that my daughter was planting these doubts. But I remembered Mr. Thompson's warning. Do not show anger. They want you to look unstable. So I answered calmly, smiling even when my heart was pounding. The social worker left after an hour, leaving me with the sinking feeling that Margaret had already woven her net too tightly. That night, Margaret sat across from me at the dinner table. She stirred her food with a sly smile. "Don't you think it's better this way, Mom? You don't have to worry about anything anymore. Just let me take care of everything." I stared at her, my fork froze in my hand. "And what happens to me once you take everything?" Her smile widened, but her eyes hardened. "You won't even notice," she said softly. "That's the beauty of it." For the first time, I saw her clearly, not as my daughter, not as the girl I raised, but as a stranger who had learned to weaponize my love against me. The following days blurred into careful strategy. I began pretending to be more forgetful than usual. If she moved the remote, I asked her innocently, "Oh, dear, where did I put it again?" If she hid the bills, I looked around aimlessly, muttering to myself. She smirked each time, thinking her plan was working. But in reality, I was baiting her to make bigger mistakes I could record. And then came another twist, one that shook me to my core. One morning, I received a phone call from the bank. The manager's voice was polite, but firm. "Mrs. Harris, we just want to confirm. Did you really want to withdraw the full amount of your savings account?" I nearly dropped the phone. "What? No, I never authorized that." There was a pause. Then the manager said carefully, "That's odd. We have paperwork here with your signature, requesting the transfer. Your daughter brought it in yesterday." My knees went weak. "That signature, it's not mine. It's a forgery." The manager hesitated. "Well, if that's true, you need to come in and contest it immediately. Otherwise, the funds will be released." My heart hammered as I hung up the phone. Margaret had crossed a line I never thought she would. It wasn't just about guardianship anymore. It was outright theft. She wanted every last piece of security I had. When she came home that evening, humming like nothing had happened, I watched her closely. She set her bag down, kissed my cheek, and asked what I wanted for dinner. I almost exploded right then, but I forced myself to stay calm. She thought she had already taken everything from me. She didn't know I had friends left, people she hadn't poisoned yet. The next morning, I met Mr. Thompson at a small cafe outside town. The air was crisp, and I clutched a folder of photographs I had taken like it was my last lifeline. His eyes scanned each picture carefully, his brow furrowed. "This is serious," he said finally. "She's not just spreading lies. She's committing fraud. But listen, if we go to court with this, we need more. Judges believe daughters over mothers, especially when age is involved. We need witnesses. We need proof she's been manipulating people." "Mrs. Collins," I whispered. "She knows the truth. She told me Margaret asked her to lie." "Good," he nodded. "We'll need her, but be prepared. Margaret won't go down without a fight. She'll twist every word you say." On my way back home, I felt a flicker of strength. For the first time, it wasn't just me against Margaret. I had someone who believed me. But that night, another storm struck. I was in the living room, writing in my notebook, when Margaret walked in holding a letter. She dropped it on the table in front of me with a smile that chilled my blood. "The hearing's been moved up. It's happening next week." I stare at the letter, my hand shaking. "Why so soon?" She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "Because I want it done. And once it's done, Mom, you won't have to worry about anything anymore. You'll just be comfortable. Quiet." The way she said quiet made my skin crawl. It wasn't just about the house or the money anymore. She wanted me silenced, stripped of dignity, erased. That night, as she slept soundly in her room, I sat awake, staring at the ceiling. My body ached with age, but my mind burned with determination. If she thought she had already buried me, she was about to learn how dangerous it is to underestimate a mother's strength. For years, I had protected her, carried her, forgiven her. But this time, forgiveness wasn't an option. This time, I would fight back. And when the truth came out, it wouldn't just ruin her plan. It would ruin her life. The week leading up to the hearing felt like a slow march toward execution. Each morning, I woke with a heaviness in my chest, knowing my daughter was planning to strip away everything I had left. Margaret acted sweeter than ever. bringing me tea, asking if I needed help with chores, even offering to rub my shoulders while I sat in the living room. But I could see it. The glint of triumph in her eyes, the way her lips curled when she thought I wasn't looking. It wasn't care. It was mockery. She thought she had already won. I kept my mask in place. I nodded, smiled faintly, and allowed her to believe I was falling deeper into confusion. At breakfast, I would forget where I left my spoon. In the evening, I would lose track of the time. Margaret smirked every time, convinced her story was becoming real. But behind closed doors, I wrote down every detail in my notebook, every staged incident, every suspicious conversation. I was building a case of my own, one that would unravel hers at the right moment. 2 nights before the hearing, I decided to test how far she was willing to go. I left the medicine cabinet slightly open, and when she thought I was asleep, I watched her from the hallway. She slipped into the bathroom, opened the bottles, and swapped labels. My heart pounded. She wasn't just spreading lies. She wanted to create evidence that I was taking the wrong pills, proof of confusion. The betrayal cut so deep that for a moment, I had to hold the wall just to stay upright. I told myself, stay calm, stay quiet. Let her believe she's clever. If I lost my composure, everything I was building would collapse. The next morning, I carefully switched the labels back before she woke up. Then I had the smallest camera I owned, an old thing with poor quality, but enough to capture shadows and voices, on the kitchen shelf. If she tried to tamper with my pills again, I would finally have proof. But the twist didn't stop there. That afternoon, Mrs. Collins knocked on my door again, her face tense. She looked around nervously before stepping inside. "I don't know if I should be telling you this," she whispered, "but Margaret came to me again. She said she'd pay me if I testified that you've been wandering into my yard at night. She told me if I refused, she'd tell people I owed her money. She's trying to scare me into helping her." I felt my blood run cold. My daughter wasn't just manipulating strangers. She was threatening them. She had turned this into a war, and she wasn't afraid of dragging others down with her. "Will you still help me?" I asked quietly, desperate for an ally. Mrs. Collins nodded, though her voice trembled. "I will, but you need more than just me. She's convincing people, and once enough of them believe her, the truth won't matter." Her words lingered with me long after she left. I knew she was right. Margaret's lies had been spreading like wildfire, and I needed undeniable proof to cut through them. That night, I prayed silently, asking for strength, not for myself, but for the chance to open people's eyes before it was too late. The following day, Margaret brought another man into the house. I recognized him from earlier visits, the one with the black briefcase. This time, I stayed hidden on the staircase, listening. "She won't fight it," Margaret said in a low voice. "Everyone already knows she's slipping. Once the judge sees the statements, it'll be over." The man's voice was calm. "You need to be careful. If she contests, it could get messy. Are you sure there's no risk?" Margaret laughed softly, a laugh that chilled me. "Risk? She doesn't even know what's happening. By the time she figures it out, it'll be done." I pressed my hand against the wall, my heart pounding. She truly believed I was powerless. She had built her victory so confidently that she couldn't even imagine me fighting back. That night, when she went to bed, I crept back to her room. My fingers trembled as I opened the black briefcase she had left by the dresser. Inside were neatly stacked folders, filled with statements, affidavits, even photographs. My breath caught when I saw them. Pictures of me, taken secretly when I looked tired or confused. One showed me sitting outside on the porch at night, head in my hands. Another captured me staring blankly at the refrigerator. They were real moments, but stripped of context, they painted the picture she wanted, a frail, confused old woman. Tears blurred my vision as I placed the papers back. My own daughter had stalked me, waiting for moments of weakness, just to use them against me. The next day, I told Mr. Thompson everything. We sat in his small office, the smell of old books and coffee filling the room. He tapped his pen against the desk, deep in thought. "She's smart," he admitted. "Too smart. But arrogance like hers is a weakness. If she thinks you're broken, she won't guard herself carefully. We'll use that." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "At the hearing, don't fight her lies directly. Let her talk. Let her spin her web as wide as she wants. And then, when she's certain she has a judge convinced, we'll bring the truth out all at once." I nodded, though fear still gnawed at me. The plan sounded good, but I knew Margaret. She would not stop until she destroyed me completely. And if I slipped even once, she would win. That evening, Margaret sat beside me on the couch, her arm draped casually around my shoulders. She smiled sweetly, but her words were poison. You know, Mom, this will be easier for you too. You won't have to think about bills or papers anymore. You can just rest. Let me handle everything. Isn't that better? I turned to her, forcing a small smile. Yes, dear, I whispered. It will be better. Inside, though, I repeated the words I had written in my notebook so many nights before. She thinks I'm weak. Let her believe it. The higher she climbs, the harder she will fall. But just as I began to feel the faint stirrings of confidence, another twist hit me. The following morning, I overheard Margaret making a phone call in the kitchen. Her voice was sharp, urgent. No, I don't want to wait until the hearing. If there's a way to move her into assisted living before then, do it. I don't care if it costs more. I'll have access to her funds soon enough. Just make it happen. I nearly dropped the glass I was holding. Assisted living? She wasn't just trying to take the house. She wanted me gone, out of her way completely. She was planning to lock me away, hidden from the world, while she enjoyed the life I had built. I retreated to my room, my heart racing, my body trembling. For a long time, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, fighting the despair creeping into my chest. But then I thought of Mr. Thompson's words. I thought of Mrs. Collins' promise. I thought of all the notes, the photos, the evidence I had quietly gathered. Margaret wanted me silent, erased, forgotten, but I would not give her that satisfaction. She thought the hearing would be her triumph. She thought it would be the day she claimed everything. But what she didn't know was that it would be the day her lies unraveled. And when the truth surfaced, it wouldn't just bruise her pride. It would shatter her life in ways she never imagined. The morning of the hearing arrived cloaked in a gray, heavy sky, as if nature itself sensed a storm waiting to unfold inside the courthouse. I woke earlier than usual, my heart pounding with restless energy. For days, I had rehearsed this moment in my mind, carefully picturing how it would unfold. Margaret confidently laying out her accusations, the judge nodding along, and then at the exact right time, my lawyer and I unveiling the evidence that would tear her lies apart. Yet, despite all that preparation, fear still pressed against me like an iron weight. Margaret, of course, was radiant with confidence. She swept into my bedroom that morning, already dressed in a sleek navy suit that made her look more like an attorney than a daughter. Come on, Mom, she said sweetly, smoothing her hair in the mirror. We want you to look nice for today. It's an important day for both of us. I caught her reflection in the mirror. Her lips curled in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Yes, dear, I whispered, my voice steady though my stomach twisted. As we drove to the courthouse, I noticed how she barely glanced at me. Instead, she was on her phone, texting rapidly, smirking every few seconds as if she were orchestrating a performance no one could stop. Her arrogance was breathtaking. She thought this was already finished. She thought she would walk away today with everything I had ever owned. The courthouse was colder than I expected, its marble floors gleaming under harsh lights. As we entered the courtroom, I could see how carefully Margaret had prepared her audience. Several neighbors were seated in the back rows, some whispering among themselves. A few looked at me with pity, others with suspicion. And there, sitting stiffly with her handbag clutched in her lap, was Mrs. Collins. She gave me the smallest nod, a silent message. I'm here. I'll stand with you. Mr. Thompson was already waiting at our table, his papers neatly stacked, his calm demeanor like an anchor against the chaos in my heart. Remember, he murmured as I sat down, we don't fight every lie directly. Let her overplay her hand. Trust me. The judge entered, a stern-faced woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing. We all stood, then sat again as the proceedings began. Margaret wasted no time. She rose gracefully, her voice dripping with practiced sorrow as she spoke. Your Honor, I never wanted it to come to this. I love my mother dearly, but I cannot ignore the truth anymore. She is no longer capable of managing her affairs. She forgets to eat. She confuses her medications. She wanders at night. It breaks my heart, but if I don't step in, she could hurt herself or worse. Gasps rippled softly through the room. Margaret's performance was flawless, every word tinged with false compassion. She even dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, as though the burden of caring for me had nearly broken her. The judge nodded gravely. Do you have evidence to support these claims? Margaret smiled through her crocodile tears and opened her briefcase. Out came the photographs, the affidavits, the statements she had forced or manipulated from neighbors. Each paper slid across the table, like another nail in the coffin she thought she was building for me. She described each image in detail, painting me as a woman fading into confusion, unable to distinguish reality from imagination. I sat still, my hands folded, my face calm. But inside, I burned with anger so hot it nearly consumed me. Each lie was a knife, twisting deeper. When the judge finally turned to me, asking if I had anything to say, I opened my mouth. But before I could speak, Margaret cut in. "Actually, Your Honor, I think it's best if my mother doesn't say too much. You'll see in a moment how her words wander, how confused she is. Please understand, I'm not trying to silence her. I just don't want her to embarrass herself." The gall of it nearly broke my composure. To silence me before I even spoke, it was the ultimate insult. But I saw Mr. Thompson's slight shake of the head. He wanted me to stay calm, to trust the plan. So I simply looked at the judge and said softly, "I would like my attorney to speak on my behalf." Mr. Thompson stood, his voice steady but commanding. "Your Honor, while my client's daughter has painted a tragic picture, we believe the evidence you've been shown has been carefully manufactured, twisted, and in some cases outright coerced. We ask for the opportunity to present an alternate perspective." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Margaret's smirk widened. She thought she had already crushed us. But as Mr. Thompson began laying out our counter, her smile faltered ever so slightly. He started small. He pointed out inconsistencies in the affidavits, how two neighbors had supposedly witnessed me on the same night in different locations, an impossibility. He highlighted how the photographs had no time stamps, no context, nothing to prove confusion beyond tiredness or ordinary forgetfulness. Then came the first twist Margaret hadn't expected. Mr. Thompson called Mrs. Collins to the stand. She walked slowly, her hands trembling, but her voice was firm when she spoke. Margaret came to me 3 times, asking me to lie. She said she'd pay me if I testified against her mother. When I refused, she threatened me, said she'd spread rumors that I owed her money. I don't know what's happening in this family, but I won't be part of it. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge raised her hand for silence, her eyes narrowing as she glanced at Margaret. My daughter's face had lost its perfect composure. A crack of panic showed in her eyes. But the real bombshell came next. Mr. Thompson calmly pulled a small device from his briefcase, the camera I had hidden in the kitchen. He played the grainy footage, the audio faint but clear enough to hear Margaret's voice. "Switch the labels. Make sure she doesn't notice. If she takes the wrong ones, it'll be obvious she's losing her mind." The words echoed in the silent courtroom, every syllable dripping with cold calculation. Gasps rose again, sharper this time, followed by whispers that filled the air like a storm. Margaret's face went pale. She stammered, trying to dismiss it as doctored, as fake, but the damage was done. The judge's sharp gaze never left her. Yet even as hope flickered in my chest, I sensed the battle wasn't over. Margaret wasn't the type to crumble easily. I could see it in her eyes, the wheels turning, the desperate calculations as she searched for a way to regain control. And then, to my horror, she played a card I hadn't expected. With sudden boldness, she turned to the judge and said, "My mother has been manipulating people for years. If you believe that recording, then you must also believe she set me up. She's been plotting this from the start. Do you really think a woman as confused as she is could secretly record conversations, hire lawyers, and turn neighbors against me? Doesn't that sound more like the actions of someone hiding her decline behind manipulation?" The audacity of it stunned me. She had twisted my strength into another accusation, claiming the very proof of her guilt was instead proof of my supposed cunning and instability. For a moment, I could see the judge's expression harden with uncertainty. The neighbors in the back row exchanged doubtful glances. Margaret, sensing her lifeline, pushed harder, her voice trembling with false outrage. "She's always been like this," she cried. "Even when I was a child, she would turn situations around, make me look like the bad one. This is just another example. Please, Your Honor, don't let her trick you the way she's tricked everyone else." The courtroom was in chaos, murmurs, whispers, even a few sharp gasps. Mr. Thompson leaned close to me and whispered, "She's desperate, but if the judge wavers, we need something stronger. Do you have anything else? Anything at all?" And I did. Hidden in my notebook at home were letters Margaret had written to creditors in my name and signed but in her handwriting. Letters that could prove forgery and fraud. I hadn't wanted to reveal them yet, fearing it would destroy her completely. But as I watched her spin the web tighter, watched her threaten to turn my life into a cage of lies, I knew. If it came down to it, I would use them. The hearing paused briefly for recess, the judge needing time to review the evidence already presented. As the room emptied, Margaret leaned close to me, her face twisted into something sharp and cruel, her whisper like venom. You think this little game will save you? You're wrong. When this is over, you'll wish you had stayed silent. I met her gaze, my voice low but steady. No, Margaret. When this is over, you'll wish you had never underestimated me. The recess felt endless, though it was no more than 15 minutes. I sat on a hard wooden bench outside the courtroom, my hands clenched together, feeling the weight of every whisper around me. People weren't subtle. Some eyed me with sympathy, others with suspicion, their hushed conversations filled with fragments of words I caught. Poor woman, so sad if it's true, but the daughter, she seemed so convincing. Margaret, meanwhile, sat a few feet away, scrolling through her phone with her chin lifted high, as though she hadn't just been caught on tape, conspiring to poison me with my own medication. She looked untouchable, untamed, her arrogance untarnished. That terrified me even more than her rage earlier, because it meant she still had something else, another plan hidden up her sleeve. Mr. Thompson leaned closer, his voice low. We've hurt her credibility badly, but she's clever. She may have another move. Do you want me to bring up the letters now? I hesitated. My stomach twisted at the thought. Those letters written in her handwriting but pretending to be me were irrefutable proof of a fraud, but they also meant unveiling the deepest shame, that my own daughter had tried to sell my property to strangers behind my back. Bringing them forward would destroy her mask completely, but it would also mean burning the last bridge between us. Before I could answer, the bailiff called us back. The courtroom filled again, the judge taking her seat with a sharp rap of her gavel. Her eyes looked weary but alert. We will continue, she said firmly. Margaret rose again, this time with a new tactic. Gone was the sweet, sorrowful act. Instead, she played the role of the victim, trembling with a different kind of rehearsed pain. Your Honor, she began, I want you to understand something about my mother. She has always been manipulative. When I was little, she would hide things and then accuse me of stealing. She would twist situations until I was blamed for everything. What you saw in that recording, it isn't proof of guilt. It's proof of her games. She must have tricked me, set me up, so she could play the martyr here. The audience murmured again, torn between shock and confusion. I could feel doubt creeping back into the room like a poison fog. That's when Mr. Thompson stood, his voice steady, each word cutting through the noise. Your Honor, this isn't just about emotional accusations. It's about facts. And the facts show a clear pattern of deceit. He held up the first of the forged letters. My heart skipped as he passed it to the judge. This is one of several letters written in my client's name, attempting to negotiate the sale of her house without her consent. Notice the handwriting. It matches Miss Margaret's exactly. Margaret's face drained of color, then flushed with fury. That's a lie. She wrote those herself. She's framing me. But Mr. Thompson was ready. He handed over another document, an analysis from a handwriting expert he had quietly arranged days earlier. We anticipated this denial. An independent expert has verified that the handwriting is Margaret's, not her mother's. And these letters were never signed, meaning the writer feared being held accountable. The courtroom gasped louder this time. The judge's lips pressed into a thin line as she studied the evidence. Margaret snapped, her composure crumbling. Of course, she got someone alive for her. She'll stop at nothing to destroy me. The judge's gaze hardened. Enough. You will have your chance to rebut, but you will not shout in my courtroom. Margaret sank back, her chest heaving, but her eyes still burned with hatred. I knew she wasn't done. Just as I felt a flicker of relief, another twist came. A figure stood up in the back of the room. A man in a crisp suit, tall, with sharp features that seemed oddly familiar. He stepped forward as the judge acknowledged him. Your Honor, he said smoothly, my name is David Calloway. I represent a financial institution that has been in contact with Margaret. I believe I have information relevant to this case. The name struck me like lightning. Calloway. I had seen it before. On the envelopes Margaret had hidden away, letters she never wanted me to read. The judge allowed him to speak, and my worst fears solidified. He presented documents showing that Margaret had already attempted to take out loans against my property, using those same forged letters as preliminary proof of consent. She had gone so far as to meet with him personally, charming him into believing she was helping her poor, declining mother manage finances. The audience erupted in shocked whispers. The judge's face darkened. Margaret tried to interject, claiming I had orchestrated the whole thing, but now her words sounded hollow, desperate. Yet even as she faltered, I noticed something chilling. Margaret's expression shifted, not to defeat, but to calculation. She glanced briefly at Calloway, then at the judge, and finally at me. A tiny, knowing smile crept across her lips. She wasn't beaten. Not yet. During the second recess, Mr. Thompson turned to me with grave eyes. She's cornered. But cornered animals are the most dangerous. Be ready. I don't think she's finished. Not by a long shot. And he was right. As we prepared to return for what could be the final stretch of the hearing, I overheard Margaret on the phone in the hallway. Her voice was sharp, filled with venom, but one phrase cut through the rest, freezing me in place. Then tell them what you saw. Make sure they believe you. If you don't, you'll regret it. She was threatening someone, another witness, someone who hadn't even appeared yet. My blood ran cold. She still had allies, people she had coerced or manipulated into backing her lies, and she was ready to unleash them, no matter the cost. When we re-entered the courtroom, I could feel the storm gathering again. The forged letters, the recording, the financial evidence. They should have been enough, but Margaret was about to play her darkest card, and I fear it would drag me deeper into the nightmare. Because if she had managed to force someone close to me into testifying against me, someone the court would trust, then even the truth might not save me. And as the bailiff announced the next witness, I felt my chest tighten in dread. It was a name I knew all too well, someone I never expected to betray me. The air in the courtroom thickened the moment the bailiff announced the next witness. My heart nearly stopped when I heard the name, Eleanor Hayes, my old friend, a woman I had trusted for years, someone who knew me as well as anyone could. If there was one person I believed would always stand by me, it was her. But when Eleanor walked in, I could see at once that something was wrong. Her eyes didn't meet mine. Her steps were hesitant. And though her face bore the faintest trace of regret, her shoulders carried a stiffness that betrayed fear. Margaret sat straight at the table, her lips curving into that insufferable, smug smile. It was clear, Eleanor wasn't here to help me. She was here because Margaret had pulled her strings. The judge nodded toward her. "Ms. Hayes, please approach the stand." Eleanor raised her hand for the oath, her voice trembling as she swore to tell the truth. Yet I could already sense the lie forming on her lips. Mr. Thompson looked wary, whispering quickly into my ear. This is the move she was saving. If Eleanor testifies against you, the court will weigh her words heavily. She has a reputation for honesty in this community. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. How had Margaret gotten to her? Blackmail? Money? Or had Margaret discovered something in Eleanor's past and used it as leverage? When Eleanor began, her voice was soft but steady. I've known Margaret and her mother for many years. I want to say that while I have no wish to hurt anyone, I cannot sit silent. I've seen her mother manipulate situations before. She likes to play the victim, and she twists the truth to make herself look innocent. The words landed like blows. My breath caught in my throat. This was the same woman who had once held my hand when my husband died. The same woman who had promised to always be there for me. And now, here she was, painting me as a liar in front of the judge. Margaret's eyes glittered as she watched me absorb the betrayal. Eleanor continued, her words rehearsed, almost robotic. There were times I saw her sign papers, and then later claimed she hadn't. She forgets things often, and I believe she may not always understand what she's agreeing to. I think Margaret has been unfairly painted as deceitful here. In truth, she has only been trying to help her mother manage her affairs. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. A few people shook their heads, whispering. The damage was immense. This wasn't just another baseless claim from Margaret. It was testimony from a supposedly unbiased friend. Mr. Thompson rose immediately for cross-examination, his eyes narrowing. "Ms. Hayes, may I ask, when did you first speak with Margaret about testifying here today?" Eleanor hesitated, glancing nervously at Margaret. A few weeks ago." "And in those weeks," Thompson pressed, his voice cutting like a blade, "did Margaret ever mention financial incentives? Did she promise you anything, money, property, or assistance with your debts?" Eleanor's face blanched, her lips parting slightly. The crowd stirred, sensing weakness. Debts, that was it. I remembered suddenly. A quiet conversation months ago, when Eleanor had admitted she was drowning in credit card bills. She had been terrified of losing her house. Could Margaret have discovered that and used it against her? Eleanor stammered. "No, she just asked me to tell the truth." Mr. Thompson leaned closer, his tone fierce. Are you saying you have no financial troubles whatsoever? That Margaret had nothing to gain from your words here today. The silence stretched painfully. Eleanor's eyes flickered with guilt. Margaret shifted uncomfortably at the table. I knew then that Thompson had struck gold. But before Eleanor could answer, Margaret exploded. This is harassment. She's my witness, and he's bullying her into silence. The judge slammed her gavel. Sit down, Margaret. This is a lawful cross-examination. Ms. Hayes will answer the question. Eleanor's hands trembled on the stand. Finally, in a voice barely audible, she whispered, I do have debts, and Margaret offered to help. The courtroom roared. The audience erupted into shocked whispers again. The judge banged her gavel until order was restored. Mr. Thompson didn't let the moment slip. So, Ms. Hayes, are we to understand that Margaret, currently accused of forgery, fraud, and coercion, bribed you with financial relief in exchange for testimony that paints her as the victim? Eleanor broke. Tears streamed down her face as she buried her face in her hands. She said if I didn't, she'd ruin me. She has information, things I don't want anyone to know. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Her confession landed like thunder. The audience's sympathy shifted instantly. Eleanor was no longer a reliable witness. She was another victim of Margaret's schemes. Margaret shot up from her seat, her composure shattered. She's lying. They're all lying. This is a conspiracy against me. The judge's voice was cold, unwavering. Enough, Miss Margaret. Sit down or I will have you removed. For the first time, Margaret faltered. She sat, her chest heaving, her eyes darting wildly. But I knew, deep down, that this wasn't over. Because Margaret didn't truly fear the judge. She didn't truly fear me, or even the evidence. What she feared was losing control, and she wasn't the kind of person to surrender quietly. As Eleanor was escorted out, the judge called another recess to process the shocking turn of events. The audience buzzed with speculation. Some looked at me with renewed sympathy. Others stared at Margaret with open contempt. In the hallway, I pulled Mr. Thompson aside. She won't stop. You saw her. She'll find another way. He nodded grimly. She's desperate, and desperate people take dangerous risks. We have to be ready for whatever she throws next. But even he didn't know what was coming. Because as we returned to the courtroom for the next round, Margaret played a card none of us could have predicted. She called for her next witness, someone whose name chilled me to the core. Your Honor, Margaret said, her voice steadying once more, I would like to call to the stand Dr. Alan Price. The name slammed into me like a fist. Dr. Price, my former physician, the same man who had once prescribed my medications, the same man Margaret had likely coerced into manipulating my dosages. If he testified that I had memory lapses, if he even hinted at incompetence, the court might begin to believe Margaret's narrative again. And as he walked in calm, collected, his white coat replaced by a sharp suit, I realized Margaret's game was far from over. When Dr. Alan Price stepped into the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted once more. He was a tall man, silver hair neatly combed back, his presence commanding immediate respect. He carried himself with the authority of a man used to being listened to, the kind of figure whose words carried weight regardless of their truth. I had once trusted him with my life, but the moment I saw the faint nod he gave Margaret as he took the stand, I knew my trust had been misplaced. The judge instructed him to take the oath, and his voice was calm, smooth, deliberate. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. To the untrained ear, it was a sound of integrity, but I knew better. That voice was rehearsed, molded over years of giving testimony in medical cases. He knew exactly how to convince people that his word was final. Margaret's attorney rose with satisfaction. Dr. Price, please tell the court your professional background. Dr. Price clasped his hands. I've been a practicing physician for 30 years. My focus has been in internal medicine and geriatrics, dealing extensively with patients in advanced age who struggle with cognitive decline, memory disorders, and the like. It was the perfect stage for Margaret's next move. She was setting him up to discredit me entirely, to paint me as a frail, confused woman whose memory could not be trusted. The lawyer continued, Have you, in the course of your practice, treated Mrs. Hamilton? Yes, Dr. Price replied smoothly. She was under my care for a period of 5 years. During that time, I prescribed her medication and observed her health closely. I clenched my fists. Observed my health closely? No. He had manipulated my prescriptions at Margaret's request. Pills that made me groggy, forgetful, uncertain of my own recollections. And what were your observations, doctor? The lawyer pressed. Dr. Price adjusted his glasses. I noted recurring complaints of fatigue, disorientation, and memory lapses. While not severe enough to declare full incapacity at that stage, there were certainly warning signs of potential cognitive decline. In my professional opinion, Mrs. Hamilton has long exhibited symptoms consistent with early-onset dementia. The words hit like a hammer. Gasps filled the courtroom. The spectators leaned in, whispering in shock. Margaret sat tall, satisfaction etched on her face. She had managed to bring in a medical authority to undermine me entirely. I wanted to shout to expose the truth, that he had manipulated my dosages, that the very symptoms he described were not natural but induced. But I knew the courtroom would see it as nothing more than the desperate denial of an old woman clinging to her dignity. Mr. Thompson, however, was not so easily shaken. He stood, his expression carefully neutral. Dr. Price, you say you observed early-onset dementia. Did you ever formally diagnose my client with this condition? No, Price admitted. I did not, but her symptoms suggested the potential development of such a condition. So, Thompson pressed. You never conducted a full neurological assessment, never referred her to a specialist, never performed cognitive testing beyond casual observation? Dr. Price's jaw tightened slightly. It wasn't necessary at the time. Thompson seized the opening. Not necessary or not supported. Because if you're going to accuse a woman of cognitive decline in a courtroom, doctor, you'd better have more than vague recollections of her being tired or forgetful. You'd better have records. The tension sharpened. The audience murmured. The judge leaned forward, clearly interested. Price shuffled his papers. My notes reflect my observations. Notes, Thompson repeated, his voice rising. But no test results, no referrals, no specialist evaluations. Just your handwritten notes, correct? Yes. And these notes conveniently support the narrative of Margaret, the very person accused of coercing her mother, forging her signature, and manipulating her finances. Would you say that's a coincidence, Doctor? Price's face darkened. I have no reason to fabricate. But Thompson wasn't done. He stepped closer. No reason? What about the fact that Margaret made large payments into your private practice account last year? Payments that coincided with changes in Mrs. Hamilton's prescriptions. Should we call that a coincidence, too? The courtroom erupted again. The judge pounded the gavel, demanding silence. My heart pounded. So Thompson had uncovered it. The money trail. Dr. Price's composure cracked for the first time. His lips tightened. Those were consulting fees. Consulting fees, Thompson echoed, his voice laced with disbelief. Paid directly from the defendant's daughter, not insurance, not Mrs. Hampton herself. Consulting fees that just happened to line up with new prescriptions that left my client more vulnerable and more dependent. Doctor, are you in the business of practicing medicine or selling false diagnoses to the highest bidder? Price stiffened. That is an outrageous accusation. Outrageous. Thompson shot back. But true. He turned toward the judge. Your Honor, I have here bank statements and prescription records that show a clear correlation between Margaret's payments and Dr. Price's adjustments to my client's medication. This was not medical care. This was manipulation. The spectators were buzzing again, the weight of the revelation rippling through the room. Margaret's face had paled. She hadn't expected Thompson to dig this deep. The judge, her expression stern, asked to see the documents. She examined them closely, her brow furrowing. Price tried to recover. Even if the timing aligns, my professional judgment remains intact. My notes reflect genuine concern. But the damage was done. His credibility was crumbling, and Margaret knew it. Yet Margaret didn't panic. Instead, she leaned over to whisper something urgently to her lawyer. Moments later, her attorney rose. Your Honor, we have additional evidence that may prove crucial to this case. We request permission to present a recorded conversation. My stomach dropped. A recording? What trick was this? The judge allowed it. The attorney pressed play, and a voice crackled through the speakers. It was my voice, faltering, weary, confused. The recording captured me speaking to someone, saying, I don't remember signing that. Maybe I did. I'm sorry, I forget things sometimes. The courtroom reacted instantly. Murmurs spread. To anyone who didn't know the context, it sounded damning. It sounded like proof of my confusion, my incompetence. I felt sick. I remembered that day. The pills Dr. Price had given me. The haze they left me in. I had been speaking under the influence, barely conscious of my words. Margaret had recorded me, waiting for the moment I would slip. Margaret smiled again, her confidence renewed. She had pulled me back into her trap. But then Mr. Thompson rose slowly, calmly. Your Honor, may I request that this recording be examined by an audio forensic expert? There are indications of splicing, and I believe this so-called confession was manipulated. The judge nodded. Motion granted. The courtroom adjourned once more, the tension razor sharp. As the spectators filed out, I caught Margaret's eyes across the room. She smirked, as if to say, you can fight, but I'll always have another weapon. And deep inside, I realized the battle was escalating beyond anything I'd imagined. Margaret wasn't just playing for money anymore. She was playing for total destruction. The next morning, the atmosphere in the courthouse was heavier than it had ever been before. Every eye in the gallery was fixed on the table where I sat with Mr. Thompson, waiting for the day's proceedings to begin. The previous day's revelations had shaken the foundation of Margaret's defense, but her last-minute recording had given her an advantage again. I could feel the whispers swirling behind me. People wondering if I really had dementia, if my memory had betrayed me, if perhaps Margaret was telling the truth all along. The burden of doubt was pressing down on me like a physical weight, but deep inside, I knew the truth. The question was, how much longer could I hold on before the lies drowned me? When the judge finally entered, silence fell like a blade cutting through the crowd. Court is now in session, she said. Her voice carried authority, but also something else, impatience. It was clear she was growing weary of the endless back and forth. She wanted clarity, resolution. That meant today could very well decide the direction of everything. Margaret's attorney was the first to rise. He carried himself with smug confidence, as though he believed the recording was enough to tip the scales completely in their favor. Your Honor, he began, yesterday, we presented evidence, a recording of the plaintiff, Mrs. Hamilton, where she herself admitted to memory lapses and confusion regarding her own signature. That evidence speaks volumes. It shows that my client, Margaret, did not coerce her mother. Instead, it reveals the unfortunate reality. Mrs. Hamilton's memory has been compromised, and any claim she makes against my client must be weighed against her condition. His words sliced into me, sharp and merciless. The gallery nodded, murmurs of agreement rippling through the rows. My heart clenched, but I forced myself to stay steady. I had to trust Mr. Thompson's preparation. Sure enough, he stood, calm as ever. Your Honor, while the defense would have you believe that recording is clear-cut proof, we contend otherwise. We have retained an independent forensic audio specialist, Dr. Evelyn Cross, who has reviewed the recording in its entirety. She's prepared to testify today regarding her findings. A stir of excitement spread through the gallery. The judge's brow lifted with curiosity. Very well. Call Dr. Cross to the stand. Moments later, a woman with sharp features and piercing eyes walked confidently to the witness stand. She carried herself with the cool assurance of someone who lived in the world of details others often overlooked. After being sworn in, she adjusted the microphone. Dr. Cross, Thompson began, please tell the court about your professional background. I hold a doctorate in electrical engineering, specializing in forensic audio analysis, she explained. For the past 15 years, I've worked with law enforcement and federal agencies to authenticate recordings, identify tampering, and uncover evidence of digital manipulation. The courtroom was silent, hanging on her every word. Now, Thompson continued, did you examine the recording presented yesterday by the defense? Yes, she said firmly. I analyzed the file using advanced forensic tools that examine frequency consistency, waveform continuity, and metadata integrity. My analysis revealed several irregularities. Margaret's lawyer shifted uneasily in his seat. Irregularities, the judge echoed. Dr. Cross nodded. Yes. Specifically, the recording shows clear evidence of splicing. Segments were stitched together from multiple conversations. In fact, background noise levels shift abruptly between sentences, indicating that different moments were combined. Additionally, the metadata of the file suggests it was altered on a device other than the one it was originally recorded on. Gasps filled the courtroom. Margaret's face drained of color, though she quickly tried to mask it with a cold glare. So, in your expert opinion, Thompson pressed, is this recording authentic? Dr. Cross leaned forward. No, it is not. It has been edited to create the illusion of confusion where none may have existed. In simple terms, it's a forgery. The gallery erupted in whispers. Even the judge looked shaken. Margaret's attorney scrambled to object, but the damage was already done. His voice cracked as he attempted to downplay the analysis, but the more he spoke, the more desperate he sounded. I felt a surge of relief wash over me. At last, the truth was pushing its way into the light. But as I glanced at Margaret, I saw something terrifying. She wasn't broken. She wasn't even rattled anymore. Her eyes burned with fury. But behind that fury was calculation. She had another move ready, and she revealed it only moments later. Rising to her feet, she addressed the court directly, her voice sharp and commanding. If we're trading accusations, then perhaps the court should hear about my mother's past, about the things she has hidden, the lies she's told, the people she's hurt. Thompson immediately objected. Irrelevant. But Margaret's attorney interjected smoothly. Your Honor, character is always relevant when assessing credibility. And we have evidence that Mrs. Hamilton has not been forthcoming about her past dealings, particularly financial ones. A chill ran down my spine. What were they planning? Margaret's lawyer produced a stack of documents and handed them to the judge. These records, he said, show that Mrs. Hamilton herself engaged in questionable transfers years ago, money moved from joint accounts without explanation, signatures that don't match, sudden disappearances of funds. I felt my breath catch. I knew exactly what those documents were. They were old records, twisted and misrepresented. At the time, I had taken steps to protect myself from my late husband's debts, moving money quickly before creditors could seize it. It had been legal, but messy. Now, Margaret was dredging it up to paint me as deceitful. The judge scanned the papers with a frown. The gallery erupted in hushed conversation again. Doubt was creeping back into the room. Margaret seized a moment. She rose and spoke, her tone dripping with venom. My mother has always played the victim, but she's not innocent. She's hidden things from this court, from me, from everyone. She calls me manipulative, but she taught me how to lie. Maybe the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Her words stung like knives. I wanted to shout, to defend myself, but Thompson placed a hand on my arm, silently urging me to stay calm. He rose once more. Your Honor, he said evenly, what the defense presented as a distraction, old records taken out of context, twisted to smear my client's reputation. But if they wish to drag the past into the light, then perhaps we should examine all the past, including Margaret's history of credit fraud, her forged checks, her fraudulent insurance claims, because we have those records as well. The courtroom fell silent again. Margaret's composure cracked, her lips trembling before she forced them into a tight line. The judge leaned back, eyes narrowing. It seems, she said slowly, that both sides have skeletons in the closet. But this case is not about 20-year-old financial decisions. It is about whether coercion, forgery, and fraud occurred in the transfer of this estate. Let's keep our focus there. The gavel struck once. Order restored. But the damage was clear. This was no longer just a legal battle. It was a war of reputations, with each side digging deeper into darkness. As court adjourned for the day, I watched Margaret storm out of the room, her lawyer trailing behind her. For the first time, she looked cornered. But I knew my daughter well enough to understand one thing. A cornered predator is the most dangerous of all. That night, back at home, I received an anonymous envelope slipped under my door. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, black and white, clearly old. It showed my late husband standing with a group of men I didn't recognize. On the back, written in neat handwriting, were the words, "Do you really know what he left behind?" My blood ran cold. Margaret had found something else, something buried so deep I had thought it was lost forever. And I realized with horror that the trial was only one battlefield. The real war was still waiting to erupt. That night, after the photograph appeared under my door, I barely slept. The image burned in my mind. My late husband standing with men whose faces I didn't recognize, shadows of a past I had long buried. The handwriting on the back was deliberate, precise, and terrifying in its implication. Do you really know what he left behind? It was a question, but it felt more like a threat. I tried to convince myself it was a bluff, just another tactic of Margaret's to rattle me before the trial resumed. But deep inside, I knew it wasn't her style. Margaret thrived on manipulation, yes, but she always wanted to be the center of the drama. This, however, had the signature of someone operating from the shadows, someone who wanted to pull strings without stepping into the spotlight. When morning came, my lawyer, Mr. Thompson, noticed immediately that something was wrong. "You look pale," he said as we sat down in his office before court. I slid the photograph across his desk. His eyes narrowed as he studied it. "Where did you get this?" "It was slipped under my door last night." I whispered. "No note, no name, just this." He turned the photo over, reading the words written on the back. His expression darkened. This isn't Margaret's doing. Too quiet, too careful. Someone else is trying to steer this case. Do you know who those men are? I asked, my voice trembling. Thompson hesitated, then shook his head. Not immediately, but I'll have this analyzed. Leave it to me. For now, don't mention it in court. The last thing we need is another distraction thrown into the record without context. But it wasn't that easy to push aside. All throughout the day's proceedings, my eyes kept drifting to Margaret. She was tense, her movements sharper than usual. It was as if she sensed the walls closing in around her after the recording was exposed as a fake. Her attorney's arguments seemed weaker too, filled with empty rhetoric instead of substance. The judge was growing impatient, repeatedly reminding the defense to focus on facts. Then, out of nowhere, Margaret stood and demanded to speak. Against her lawyer's whispered protest, she addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor," she said with icy determination, "I have proof that my mother is hiding far more than anyone realizes. If the court will allow it, I can bring witnesses who knew my father, people who can testify to her lies." The gallery buzzed with excitement. My heart dropped. Was this what the photograph was tied to? Witnesses who could dredge up things from my husband's past? The judge, though skeptical, agreed to hear from one such witness later in the week. That night, back at home, I sat staring at the photograph for hours. My husband had been many things, distant, stern, burdened by debts, but never had I suspected something darker. Yet the longer I looked at the men beside him, the more I noticed. One had a tattoo on his hand, a symbol I faintly recall from news reports decades ago, linked to a local syndicate involved in illegal money lending. Another wore a signet ring etched with initials I didn't recognize. These weren't just business associates. They were dangerous men. And then came the knock. It was past midnight. Hesitant, I peered through the peephole. A man in his late 50s stood there, wearing a cap pulled low over his brow. My heart pounded, but something urged me to open the door. He spoke in a low, gravelly voice. "You don't know me, but I knew your husband. The photograph? That wasn't left to scare you. It was left to warn you." I froze. "Warn me of what?" "Of your daughter," he said simply. "Margaret has made deals she doesn't understand. The people in that photo, they don't forget and they don't forgive. Your husband owed them, and Margaret promised them more than she can deliver. If she drags this trial on, if she tries to take everything, they'll come for her, and maybe for you." My blood turned cold. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I owed your husband once," he said, eyes flickering with guilt. "And because I don't want to see another family torn apart by his ghosts." Without another word, he pressed a slip of paper into my hand and walked away. I shut the door quickly, locking it behind me. My hands shook as I unfolded the paper. It was an address, scrawled in hurried handwriting, with a single note beneath. "The truth is buried here." The next day, I told Thompson everything. He listened in silence, his jaw tightening with every detail. When I handed him the address, he sighed. "This is getting far more dangerous than a property dispute. If Margaret is tied up with people like this, then exposing her could mean more than just winning the case. It could mean saving your life. But if we use this in court, it could destroy her completely." I whispered. "Do you still care about that?" he asked softly. I didn't answer, because despite everything, despite the lies, the betrayal, the cruelty, she was still my daughter. And some part of me couldn't let go of the hope that she could be saved. Later that week, Margaret's promised witness finally appeared. To my shock, it was none other than an old family friend, Mrs. Callahan, who had known us since Margaret was a child. She took the stand, her wrinkled hands trembling as she adjusted her glasses. "Tell the court what you know," Margaret urged her. Mrs. Callahan glanced at me with sorrow before speaking. "Years ago, I overheard Mrs. Hamilton speaking about moving money, large sums, without telling her husband. She said it was to protect herself, but it always seemed dishonest to me." Margaret smirked triumphantly, but I could see something else in Mrs. Callahan's eyes, hesitation. It was as if she was being forced to say these things. When Thompson cross-examined, the truth slipped out. "Mrs. Callahan," he said gently, "who asked you to come here today?" She hesitated. "Margaret did." "And did she offer you anything in exchange?" Silence. Then, finally, a whisper. "She said she'd help pay my medical bills if I testified." The courtroom exploded. The judge banged her gavel furiously for silence. Margaret's face burned red with fury, her composure cracking completely. The judge's warning was clear. One more stunt like this, and sanctions would follow. But I couldn't feel victorious, because in that moment, I realized Margaret wasn't just desperate. She was spiraling out of control, and desperate people made reckless deals. Deals with the kind of men who appeared in that photograph. That night, I made a decision. I would go to the address written on the slip of paper. I had to know what truth was buried there. The next morning, before court resumed, Thompson reluctantly agreed to come with me. The address led us to an abandoned storage facility on the outskirts of town. The place reeked of dust and mold. But inside one of the rusted units, we found a battered trunk. Within it lay stacks of old ledgers, photographs, and documents, records of illegal loans, forged signatures, and payoffs spanning decades. My husband had been deeply entangled in a network of corruption, and Margaret, whether knowingly or not, had stepped into a shadow. At the very bottom of the trunk, there was something worse, a ledger page dated only 2 years ago. And under debtor, written in neat, unmistakable handwriting, was my daughter's name. Margaret owed them. And if she couldn't pay, the consequences would fall on all of us. The discovery of Margaret's name in the ledger haunted me for days. Each time I closed my eyes, I could see those neat letters etched across the yellow page, binding her men whose very shadows spelled danger. I wanted desperately to believe it wasn't her handwriting, that it was some elaborate forgery planted to frame her, but deep down I knew the truth. Margaret had walked into this web willingly. What terrified me more was the thought of why. What kind of debts would drive my daughter to seek help from the same people who had once controlled and ruined her father? In court, Margaret seemed increasingly agitated. Her usual sharp confidence was replaced with frantic energy, her eyes darting around as though she expected something, to burst through the doors at any moment. When her lawyer spoke, she barely listened. Instead, she tapped her nails against a wooden table, her lips moving silently as if rehearsing lines. During one recess, Thompson leaned close to me. "She's cracking, but be careful. Cornered people are unpredictable." His words proved truer than I could have imagined. That afternoon, as proceedings dragged on, Margaret suddenly stood up again, ignoring her attorney's attempts to restrain her. "Your Honor," she said, her voice trembling but loud enough to carry across the courtroom. "My mother is hiding money. She's been hiding it for years. That's why she's fighting me so viciously. She doesn't want anyone to know about the offshore accounts." Gasps rippled through the audience. I nearly collapsed in my chair. Offshore accounts? My husband had once mentioned the possibility of moving assets, but I had dismissed it as one of his wild ideas during his worst financial years. Had he actually done it? And if he had, why was Margaret so certain I knew? The judge frowned. "Do you have evidence of this claim, Ms. Hamilton?" Margaret faltered, her lips parting and closing. For a moment, I thought she had nothing, but then she reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, slamming it onto the table. Inside were copies of bank statements, foreign transfers, accounts under shell companies, large sums moved across borders years ago. I felt the air leave my lungs. Thompson snatched the papers, scanning them with a practiced eye. "These could be forgeries," he argued quickly. But even he couldn't hide the flicker of doubt in his expression. The judge, though skeptical, allowed the evidence to be submitted for review. "We will investigate these claims," she said firmly. Margaret smiled at me then, a cruel, triumphant smile. It wasn't just about winning the case anymore. She wanted to ruin me, to strip me bare before the world, to prove I was no better than her father. That night, I confronted Thompson. What if the accounts are real? What if my husband actually did this? He rubbed his forehead. "If they're real, we need to prove you had no knowledge of them, that they were solely your husband's doing. Otherwise, Margaret will paint you as a liar who benefited from dirty money. But what if she's already in too deep with those men?" I asked, what if this is all part of a bargain with them, to find the hidden assets and deliver them? Thompson's eyes widened. That would explain everything. The next day, instead of heading straight to court, I returned to the storage unit where we'd found the ledgers. I needed answers, something to either confirm or refute what Margaret had shown. Thompson accompanied me reluctantly, his nerves on edge. Inside the trunk, we combed through page after page of brittle records. Finally, at the bottom of another ledger, we found references to offshore accounts, numbers that matched the very statements Margaret had presented. My knees nearly buckled. It was true. My husband had hidden fortunes overseas, and somehow Margaret had unearthed the trail. But then, a chilling discovery. Scribbled in the margins of one page was a note. M to deliver by 2022. M, I whispered. It's her, Margaret. He involved her, even back then. The realization hit me like a blow. My daughter hadn't just stumbled upon this secret after his death. She had known, perhaps even helped years ago. She had been complicit all along. Back in court, her behavior grew even more erratic. During one session, she lashed out at me in front of everyone, accusing me of driving her father to desperation, of manipulating the family to seize control. Her voice cracked as she screamed, "You think you're innocent, but you're not. You knew what he was doing, and you let it happen." The judge ordered her to sit, her lawyer pale with embarrassment, but her words left a heavy silence hanging in the courtroom. Afterward, in the hallway, a man brushed past me, slipping a folded note into my coat pocket, so smoothly I almost didn't notice. My heart pounded as I opened it in secret. She's running out of time. If she doesn't deliver soon, they'll collect another way. No signature, just a chilling message. That night, Margaret appeared at my door unannounced. Her eyes were wild, her hair disheveled, and for the first time, she didn't look like my enemy. She looked like my little girl, terrified and cornered. "Mother," she whispered, "they're going to kill me if I don't find the rest of it. I need the keys. I need access to the safety deposit boxes. Please, just give them to me." I stood frozen, torn between rage and heartbreak. "What have you done, Margaret? What deals did you make?" Tears filled her eyes. I didn't have a choice. Father left me with promises I couldn't keep. I thought if I gave them what they wanted, they'd leave me alone. But it's never enough. It's never enough. For the first time, the mask of arrogance dropped, and I saw the frightened child underneath. But before I could answer, headlights flashed outside. A car pulled up, its engine rumbling like a predator waiting in the dark. Margaret's face went pale. "They've found me," she whispered. The knock at the door was slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly polite. The knock at the door echoed through the silent house like a warning bell. Margaret clutched my arm, trembling, her nails digging into my skin. I had never seen her so fragile, so unlike the defiant woman who had fought me in court. For a split second, I considered protecting her, my daughter, my blood. But then the weight of everything she had done, every betrayal, every cruel smile as she tried to tear my life apart, surged through me. I walked slowly to the door and opened it. Two men stood there in dark suits, their eyes sharp, their expressions void of mercy. One of them tipped his hat politely. "Mrs. Hamilton," he said in a low, steady voice, "we've come for what was promised." Margaret let out a broken sob. "Please, give me more time. I almost have it, I swear." The man ignored her, his gaze fixed on me. "She thinks you still hold the keys. Do you?" At that moment, everything clicked. Margaret's entire crusade, dragging me to court, tearing through my past, destroying my name, was never about justice or inheritance. It was desperation. She needed to prove she could deliver my husband's hidden fortune. And when she couldn't, she tried to drag me into the fire with her. But she had underestimated me. Without a word, I stepped aside and let the men in. Margaret's eyes widened in horror. "Mother, no, don't do this. You did this." I said coldly, "You chose their world. You tried to destroy me for it. And now, you'll face what you invited." The men seized her arms. She screamed, struggling, her voice high and panicked. "Mother, please, don't let them take me. I did it all for you. For us, don't." Her words cut off as they dragged her toward the door. I stood still, unmoving. Just before stepping outside, one of the men paused and looked back. "Consider the debt settled," he said. "You'll never see us again." The door closed, and silence fell over the house. For the first time in years, I felt an unfamiliar peace settle inside me. My husband's sins had been buried with him, and my daughter's choices had sealed her fate. I hadn't raised my hand, hadn't taken revenge in some dramatic act. I had simply allowed Margaret's own greed and alliances to consume her. In court the following week, her absence was noted but not questioned for long. Thompson argued our case with ease, and with Margaret gone, the judge dismissed her claims entirely. The house, the estate, the life my husband had left me, it all remained mine. As I stood outside that courthouse, free at last, I realized the truth. Revenge is not always about striking back. Sometimes it is about waiting, watching, and letting your enemies destroy themselves. And Margaret, she had been her own executioner.